Welcome to Swami Reacts, and today we'll be sharing some thoughts about Daniel Ladinsky's book, Love Poems from God, 12 Sacred Voices from the East and the West. This is a beautiful book I just finished. The last one I had to finish from all the poetry books written by Daniel Ladinsky. I had the fortune of going through his other books. The subject tonight is love. I heard God laughing, the purity of desire, and so on, and so many others. So it's a beautiful one. In this case, it's a compilation of 12 great personality sacred voices from the East, from the West, Islam, Christianity, the various Hindu traditions, and so on, all rendered in Daniel's unique voice in poetry. He himself gave me this book when I met him a few months ago in Taos, New Mexico. It has its beautiful dedication. Maybe you can read it from there. He says, "So dear Swami, so sweet, so sweet." Again, thanks, Daniel. And it reminded me of our different prayers in our tradition, Madhurashtakam, Madhuram, 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 when referring to the ultimate nature of reality as sheer sweetness. So sweet. So this was a very sweet dedication he gave. It was not the first one. He already signed another books. That's why he say again, thanks. So very sweet person, very sweet poetry, very sweet inspiration coming from someone that I'm starting to appreciate more and more. Having met him in person recently, I received the good news that he accepted my invitation for him to write the foreword to my fourth book, which let's see when it will be published, on the topic of unconditional love, which is a topic that is very close to Daniel Ladinsky. And in this book, this topic comes over and over again, how much we are being loved by God. Actually, he mentioned many times, because you can see the title is Love Poems from God. And when he presented the book to Penguin, the editing house, the publishing house, they said, why not to call it Love Poems for God, right? From us to God. But he insisted on the from part of the title, indicating, because in big part, this is about God reaching us. Now, we will reach to him eventually as a result of that. First of all, it speaks about how we are being already loved by God, accepted by him, embraced by him. So I really appreciated that point and how the poems basically reflect all that. In the book, Daniel mentions about the authors that the experience of these sacred voices foretells our own. So I love that particular expression. It reminded me, Srila Siddharmaharaj speaking about how our guru is our own potential appearing in front of us. So in this case, the same. The experience of God that these great souls have foretells our own. It's a trailer. It's a glimpse into all that we can be. So Daniel writes these poems. He has researched, he has rendered them into his own voice. He very interestingly writes in the acknowledgement section, the 300 poems in this book, 300, were selected from over 1,000. I stole from God when he made the mistake of letting me go through his files, so it seemed. Thanks God for not suing me. Maybe we will publish more of this wonderful contraband. So at the end of the day, all copyrights, right, go to the sweet absolute. We can honor his files, do something with them, put some words in it, but ultimately all inspiration, all source copyrights go there. So what I'm thinking about doing today is sharing a few of those points with you to give you a trailer what this book speak about, sharing a few reflections on that, and moving to the next poem, and so on and so forth. So we can begin with a poet, a lady poet, very interesting, that I didn't know about. Her name is Rabia. She's a Sufi mystic from Islam. Interestingly, it is said that probably she's the person who most influenced Rumi, the famous Rumi himself. So I will read for you a poem coming in page 12 of this book. The title is It Works. It says like this. Would you come if someone called you by the wrong name? I wept. because for years he, the divine, did not enter my arms. Then one night I was told the secret. Perhaps the name you call God is not really his. Maybe it's just an alias. I thought about this and came up with a pet name for my beloved. I never mentioned to others. All I can say is, it works. So that's the title of the poem, It Works. So I really like this poem by Rabia, the rendering of Daniel Ladinsky. Again, Daniel basically makes a rendering of the original in his own words and terminology. So in one sense, we could argue it's his own poem, inspired by these poets. So this one speaks about how we can call God for years through certain names. And it's not that their names are not his, actually. In our tradition especially, we'll say between God and his name, there is no difference. But at one point, Rabia here, she says, I came with a pet name or a nickname, a very personal, intimate name between the sweet absolute and me, and it works. So in other words, it's giving us permission to explore the personal, unique relationship we have with the divine. And even, as we say many times, not only repeat other people's prayers to God, but compose our own, officially, on the spot, and address the divine, the sweet absolute, in ways that resonate with our relation, with the unfolding relationship with the absolute. At the end of the day, every name of God, as Bhaktivinoda says in the Harinam Chintamani, the main names of God, the Mukhya Nam, are those who speak about his loving relationship with his devotees. There are other names more general, like God, like the Absolute, the Creator, like they're not so specific and tied to a particular flavor of love. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur makes the point, when the names of the divine, we will say Gopinath, Yashodanandan, and so many others, include his devotees and a particular loving interaction between them, that becomes all the more sweet. So there is place for us in the unfolding of our own connection to the divine to manifest those new names. And as Rabia will conclude here, it seems it works. So let's move. Of course, I'm not going through each one of the 12 poets he includes here. I will mention briefly who are those 12, just in case it gives you a further inspiration. It's Rabia, St. Francis of Assisi, we'll turn to him next. Rumi, Mr. Eckhart, famous Christian mystic, St. Thomas Aquinas, Hafiz, St. Catherine of Siena, Kabir, Mirabai, St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, and Tukaram. Let's move to St. Francis, a poem called The Sacraments, in page 53 of the book. We know St. Francis, his level of communion and connection with nature and his discovery of the sacred and the divine among the animal kingdom and among every single corner of creation. So this poem is titled The Sacraments, which in Christianity speak about these particular sacraments, generally conceived in terms of certain rituals and things done in the church, generally with a priest in between, and so on. I once spoke to my friend, says Francis, an old squirrel, about the sacraments. He got so excited and ran into a hollow in his tree and came back holding some acorns, an old feather, and a ribbon he had found. And I just smile and say, yes, dear, you understand. Everything imparts his grace. So beautiful, simple, powerful, to the point, right? We are talking about sacraments. Sacraments has to do with the sacred. And sometimes we may just limit that, the sacred moment, a sacred interaction, a sacred contact with the divine to something that happens in a particular religious building, through a particular intermediary person, in some particular ritualistic ceremonial setting. And if not, sorry, the sacred is not accessible. But of course, Francis was not that person. He will find the sacred. He will have difficulty not finding the sacred anywhere, because it was everywhere. So he will find the sacred everywhere. And here he's talking to a squirrel. Generally, you don't hear of human beings having sacred interactions with squirrels. But this poem reveals so. So Francis brought the topic of sacraments, and the squirrel brought a feather, brought the ribbon, brought the, what else? An acorn. Again, a seed, anything. Like understanding, oh, the sacraments, here they are. And Francis saw the squirrel and, yeah, you got it. And the poem concludes, everything imparts his grace. In other words, if we have the eye to see, the ear to hear, every single atom is oozing with the presence of the divine. Everything is an access portal. Everything is an entry point. Everything is perfection is everywhere, in the words of Srila Siddhar Maharaj. We can contact grace through any single point because grace is omnipresent. Only us may be omniabsent. Let's move to Rumi, of course. We have to go to him. Rumi, short one, Spiritual Health, page 72. A good gauge of spiritual health is to write down the 3 things you most want. If they in any way differ, you are in trouble. This is the point. So what could be a good sign of spiritual health? Write down those 3 things, your top 3 that you most want. And if there's any difference between those 3, in other words, if those 3 are not the same, the one and the same thing, you are in trouble. Still, you have not become focused, passionate enough, absorbed enough to have only the divine in 1, 2, 3, so to say. Then there is some trouble. There is some divisiveness. There is some lack of integration. I want this, but also I want that, but also I want this. Instead of I want this, in relation to whom I know everything else exists. Everything else is embraced and held. So by having this, by addressing this, by discovering this in everything, by discovering the divine in every person, every atom, a squirrel, a feather, I don't need to put so many things. I don't need to create fragmented dualistic view of reality. If not, we are in trouble. Let's move to Thomas Aquinas. I'm skipping a few authors, sorry. Page 136. This is a poem called Could You Embrace That? Beautiful one. Thomas said, I say to God, let me love you. And he replied, which part? All of you, I said. Dear, God spoke, you are a mouse wanting to impregnate a tiger who is not even in heat. It is a feat way beyond your courage and strength. You will run from me if I remove my mask. The intensity of the divine. I say to God again, beloved, I need to love you. Every aspect, every pore. And this time, God said, there is a hideous blemish in my body. Though it is such an infinitesimal part of my being, could you kiss that if it were revealed? I will try, Lord. I will try, Thomas Aquinas said. And then God said, that blemish is all the hatred and cruelty in this world. So a beautiful way of saying, if we want to love God, we need to love everything in one way or another, whether it is with compassion, with passionate affection, with empathy. But if we want to love God, we need to love everything and everyone who exists in connection to Him. Again, I cannot avoid thinking of Dorothy Day. I only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. It goes all the way down to everything and everyone. So if we are really, the other day I was reading also about these 40 rules of love from the Sufi tradition as well. And one of them is, okay, it's easy to love God. He's perfect, He's beautiful, they're all attractive, we will say. But the real test of loving God is to love the imperfect, to love the frail, to love the broken, to love the messy. And then you are actually showing that you want to love God, because loving God entails loving everything else. If not, we may just establish a comfort zone to relate to the divine. Just loving Him because He's beautiful and perfect and all attractive. What about all the other part, all that blemish, as the poem will say, in God's body, so to say? Let me conclude with 2 more poems. Let's go to Hafiz and then Tukaram. It's a famous one by Hafiz. The sun never says, page 170. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole world. Beautiful way of speaking about God's unconditional love. The love the sun is giving to the earth so much light to allow the earth to blossom in so many ways. And never for a single moment the sun has even suggested, you earth over down there, you owe me a lot by all this light I'm sending. So what's the result of a love like a light that enlightens like that? It lights the whole world. No? The love that the sun has for us. So in the same way, it's a parallel, an analogy for God the Sun, we will say Krishna Surya, and he's giving his light in the form of heat, warmth, love, without asking anything in return, unconditionally. So what's the result of that? It puts the whole world enlightened if we become aware of that reality. That's why we many times start our day with Surya Namaskar, offering our salutation to the sun as a reminder of how the sun is enlightening this world and how that parallels the way we are being loved by the sweet absolute. Beautiful. Let's conclude with Tukaram, devotee of Krishna, according to his biography, of course, and beautiful poet. So we'll end up with one poem called Certainty, on in page 350. You also, for those who know me, you know where I will go when I speak about certainty. Inspired by our dear Father Richard Rohr. Certainty undermines one's power and turns happiness into a long shot. Certainty confines. Dears, there's nothing in your life that will not change, especially all your ideas of God. Look what the insanity of righteous knowledge can do. Crusade and maim thousands in wanting to convert that which is already gold into gold. Certainty can become an illness that creates hate and greed. God once said to Tukaram, even I am ever changing, I am ever beyond myself. What I may have once put my seal upon may no longer be the greatest truth. Amen, Tukaram Ji. So certainty, the opposite of faith, as Father Richard will say, certainty, toxic certitude. Religion is not, spirituality is not about certainty, but having patience with mystery. And the willingness to reconfigure, update, upgrade our ideas about everything, especially about the ever-evolving divine. He himself is in constant state of update, as I like to talk in evolution and divine love. So these are some glimpses. I shared just what, 6 of them? Yeah, 6 poems from 300. So you can just imagine how much of a banquet you will have here. And let me conclude with a few words from Daniel Ladinsky, the author of these poems, ultimately. Or an instrument, the ultimate author. We know who he is, she is, they are. So he presents his hope in writing this beautiful book. He says, I hope you fall into this wine barrel, this book, and crawl out legally drunk and get arrested for doing something that makes God proud of you, like being too happy. These are the words of a dear friend and inspiration, an elder Daniel Ladinsky. So sweet that his own words declare. So more than invited to dive into this beautiful work, love poems from God. Thanks so much for joining me, and see you in our next episode of Swami Reacts.